Hello, I'm Riley, and this is Marilyn JohnsonFarr, and this is On the Way Up, Hanson Leadership Advisory Board new interview series. Uh, I'm here with Marilyn JohnsonFarr. Do you want to give yourself a little bit of introduction, who you are, what you do on campus?
I am Dr. Marilyn Johnson-Farr, part of the College of Education. And as I look around at my colleagues, I can say that I am the senior member now of the group, coming from Lincoln Public Schools to Doane, still having ties, very close ties in Lincoln Public Schools, still working in some capacity, but been there have been at the table at Doane well over 20 some years. And I'd have to go back and look exactly when I came, but it has been, someone referred to me when I was at the gym that when I was, this is kind of off topic, yet it is on topic. Uh, there were two gentlemen in the pool. And so one of them looked at me and said, I've heard your voice before. Did you used to teach at LPS? And I said, yes. He said, did you do staff development stuff? I said, yes. He said, well, I recognize your voice. And then the other gentleman with him said, well, are you still at Doane? And I said, yes. And he said, well, you're getting to be a legacy, aren't you? I said, well, maybe so.
Well,
So anyway,
that's awesome. I've certainly enjoyed you as a professor in my field of education. So the whole purpose of these interview series is kind of talk about leadership. So I think a good place to start is what is leadership to you? What would you define leadership as?
I think it's an opportunity really to live out life at a capacity you didn't dream of. And in that living it out, you have enough boldness to be able to reach back and bring somebody along with you on the journey and be vulnerable in that process, but really believe enough in self to be confident to deal with any obstacles that you might encounter and lead with a sense of integrity, but most importantly, purpose, and not to collapse the first moment that things don't work out as you've got them figured out in your head.
Awesome. So we started this leadership process as far as interviews, and I put out a bunch of Google polls, and your name kept on coming up. Do you think there's a reason behind that, or do you just have a bunch of followers on campus?
I'm not so sure I have a group of followers, but I think I bring a much different authenticity to experiences because, as I've developed myself, the whole notion of realness really resonates with me. So perhaps when I first came to Doane, um, my mask might have been more pronounced. And now, as I get towards the end of my Doane experiences, you take what you get. And so maybe that's the perspective that is so different about me and the capacity of being authentic and being true to who I am. So that probably does that. And I think one of the things when we sit down at the table, oftentimes as a department, the notion of advocacy really resonates with me because I know there are some students that stay in productive struggle. And I know that that's been part of my journey as being the only for so long. And I really try to be conscious of that. So perhaps that's where that resonates from.
I could definitely concur with this. I remember signing up freshman year for my LAR classes, and you're required to take your LAR if you're an educator.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's like, man, that class is hard. And I was just like, a lot of course load? Like, what are we doing? And she goes, no, Marilyn makes you think. And I just
Mm-hmm.
remember that sticking out to me, and it was very true. There's a lot of deep conversations in that class. Just to pivot a little bit, the month is February. It's Black History Month, and I think it's kind of important to talk about Black leadership. Do you think it is important to be a leader of color on campus? Is there importance to be a leader of color on campus?
I think it is imperative. And the reason why I say that is Doane continues to be very homogenized. And many of the students, as you know, Riley, who come to Doane, their only exposure has probably been through what they've seen on TV or other social media platforms. And so the power in having people who look like, think like, act like, smell like differently gives them an opportunity to sit in it for a moment and try to deconstruct some of those things that they've been led to believe. I also think that in the process, when we have opportunities with the limited people who look like me on campus that are in leadership, when we have an opportunity to team with a white colleague that begins to deconstruct some of those things about people can't get along. But it can backfire too, depending upon the development of the white colleague, because in some cases, the white colleague might try to undermine the person of color. And so I think it's really important that the opportunities to be seen as a Black female on campus is important. It is not without risk, because I know that I have, it may not be a big T, but I have a small t, perhaps feeling targeted sometimes because I'm going to speak the truth, and much of the truth, because of the limitedness of people who look like me, is uncomfortable to people. And sometimes white people don't want to hear that. Yeah, they think you push the race button, push the race button, but it's a different consciousness level. And until we're able to talk about that honestly, I don't think we see any growth. And in our field of education, if we're trying to create well-rounded individuals who have a cultural lens, we have to have those tougher talks. And I know oftentimes people don't want to. If you look at the structure of Doane, and if you look at the leadership starting at the administrative tier, sometimes it's very easy at a predominantly white institution to pick people that look like me that make you feel comfortable. So in other words, don't speak your truth. Just go along to get along, shine my shoes. And so that's where it gets really complicated sometimes. But as I said, I'm in the season now. I am not worried about impression management. I am just really doing what I know I need to do, because I hope that in my departure, when that comes, that there will be somebody that I can actually go to and say, you know, if you come to Doane, here are the people that I know that you can go to, that you can trust, who understand and won't use your narrative against you. And so there's a lot of layers. I've had a lot of disappointment in the way that some of the opportunities that we had as an institution to bring others on that look like me and we didn't take advantage of them because the people at the top were not comfortable. And I really regret that that happened in those instances. Dr. Cooper came as a result of her pastoring the church that I belong to. And she and Dr. Hayes came each interterm, which was probably before your time, and they taught each interterm season. Again, exposure to Black theologians. What a surprise to white students. And so then over the years, there were creative ways to be able to use, as we look at Dr. Cooper as part of the unit now, to use those gifts. One of my sisters from another mother, Dr. Callback, she and I are very like-minded. And we actually had the same advisor when we were in our doctoral program. So that's when she and I connected. And then when the opportunity at Doane came, uh, she contacted me and had a series of questions for me to ask. So it's surrounding yourself with people as you lead that know will continue to push the dial. So I have this, there are a group of very young, progressive white faculty that I trust. And so in my trusting of them, I know they're not afraid to see me as a Black woman. They understand that. And so I'm hoping that as, again, I look at fewer pages in my book of residence at Doane, that they will be able to continue to advocate. But I am not ashamed. I am unapologetically not ashamed to be Black at Doane. There is nothing to hide it. I'm over that. So.
Uh, Kind of just steering right into that answer. Do you think there is of extra importance during this month to step in that role of being a uh, person of color and a leader on campus?
I think it locates itself in being consistent, and I really try to be consistent. Interestingly enough, after all of the civil unrest over the spring and the evolution of the narratives of Breonna Taylor, uh, George Floyd, Aubrey, all of those, it was really a different situation, Riley. So I kind of got in my feelings because I was sitting and thinking, okay, so nobody in the department is saying anything to me. And of course, Dr. Callback and I had had a little tennis ball back and forth. And then two of my colleagues, one in the graduate program and the other in undergrad, reached out. It was like they were in my backyard because I had just pinned an email that I was sending to the department. And one was really very touching. The one said, I wanted you to know that our family is thinking about you. And so I was starting to think, as well intentioned as we are as a department, what were we going to do to ensure that the Brandons and the Austins and those students returning, that they felt it was safe to come back? And so once I sent my email, then of course I began to hear from more people, and we've been engaged in a College of Ed wide um, series of conversations focused on racial healing. But would that have looked different had I not initiated something? And in preparation for the students that we serve and ourselves as faculty, when do we start having those non-agended conversations when we can really talk about how we feel and the impact of that on our interaction with our students. And how do I know that in years to come, or maybe it's not important, that students who come that look like me know the Brandy Hagemans, know the Heather Lamberts, those folks that they can go to when something is awry. So it was really quite a interesting spot for me to be, not negating that people didn't care, but when do you get to the point where you get over saying, I don't know what to say?
Yeah, it's a very deep summer.
Yeah.
It just historically, and then as far as I know, that's something in the ed realm that we have tussled with, um, just even in last semester in quarantine. A lot of us, I know ed majors, a bunch of us just sat in, and as far as social studies majors personally, just how am I going to teach this? How am I
Hmm.
going to teach this in 4 or 5 years when um, we talk about current events or recent history, or I get a class like current issues? How do I address that? And I think that's pretty important to be talking about.
And think about this too. This is another, I'm just going to say it. This was another big disappointment. So Rona reared her head across the country. Her victims, a lot of them looked like me. When we start thinking about the students that we come who came from some of those ravaged areas, not a damn thing was said from the university as a touch to say, we're thinking about you and your families. I'm a Black student. I come back to this sea of white. There was not one thing that would assure my parents that things were going to be okay. And you just can't assume anymore. We know there are a lot of people who are mentally not all the way in the game. And so I don't know if you noticed in the fall that there were signs on campus that said Black students matter at Doane, blah, blah, blah. I bought those signs because I was concerned. I don't know all the Black students, that's not my job, but I wanted them to know that there was somebody who was at least visually thinking about them. And I just think we have horrible optics at Doane in terms of we talk about inclusion, we talk about diversity, but we still don't have it figured out. And there's not an influx of Hispanic students at Doane. There's more, but what's their story? So again, I just think we have so many layers that I've tried to find ways in my leadership to not let that get on the back burner. And so that people are thinking that consciousness levels are raised.
Yeah, I think that's pretty pertinent in your prior story of being reached out to this summer uh,
Mm-hmm.
from other individuals that
Mm-hmm.
are in your community.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that is something that needs to happen more often? I know a lot of people are scared to reach out to people as far as what it may seem like, asking another individual for help or telling another individual that they're there for them. Do you think that's something that needs to happen more often?
I think if you foster a relationship, it doesn't seem awkward, but it's cultivating the ground for that relationship and being authentic. I think, as you know, as you've been in and out of the classroom, a student can size you up in 2 minutes. And so you have to be true to yourself and be willing to be as transparent as possible. And I think once we get to that point, we're able to engage in greater and deeper and more meaningful conversations. But sometimes you have to start with that conversation with self first before you can do that.
Um, Talking about starting cultivation and making sure leadership keeps continuing on the up and up here on campus. I know you play a massive role in the Black Student Alliance. Would you tell me a little bit more about that? How that started? Was it a group of students? Was it you?
It's a very different. season. Now, I've been there a long time. And the students who I worked with when I first started were a very different group of students. They loved the interaction with one another. They loved looking out for each other in terms of social, emotional, and all of those pieces that happen at an institution uh, where you're spending a good majority of your time. There was a different camaraderie. I think today and this season, we do less talking like this. So I put something in, what is it, Snapchat. I put something on Instagram. So I really don't have to have any communication with you. There was that absence in the earlier years. This group, I think there are a portion of them who feel like it isn't necessary to have that interaction, and therefore they've siloed themselves. And in looking at that from another lens, they don't have that systemic drive to change things because they really don't think people at Doane care. So they've gotten to the point where they figure, let me get my degree and let me get the hell out. And I'm not going to worry about anything else, which is disappointing because at this time when momentum is good, when they can move from getting more co-conspirators to go down in the trenches with them versus allies. But I've learned one thing leadership has taught me: delete, delete, delete. You can't do it all. And so this Black History Month has not turned out to be what my desire was, but I'm good because I am not the group. I'm just the sponsor. There's talent there, but I just think that they've gotten hung up and have maybe burned out trying to get that cohesiveness amongst the group, which is unfortunate.
Speaking of young Black leaders on campus, what piece of advice would you give to young Black leaders and young other people of color on, off campus, in elementary school, in middle school, that are looking to step into shoes of leadership?
Find your voice, know your voice, use your voice, and really try not to be discouraged by what doesn't happen. Recognize the obstacles, navigate the obstacles, but don't cave behind the obstacles. And I think too, Riley, a person really has to know themselves. Where are my gifts? Just like when all of this civil unrest began, was I going to be out protesting? Was I going to be letter writing? Was I going to just sit back and watch? Which line was I in? And I think you have to figure out where you can do your best work. Where is that? And I think all of us have to wrestle with that question.
Yeah, wrestling the question as far as who you are going to be as a leader. I think that's very important. I think that's important as a college student. Was there any hitches or hiccups in your leadership journey? Was there a time that you really felt that you weren't going to make it, or something bad happened and you just weren't going to be there? And then in return, how did you turn it around? How did you take that low point and make it a high point?
I've been silenced, and that's regret. And sometimes in that process of silence, sometimes just sitting in it, you can observe and learn and then reflect. And so, in the moments that I was silenced, in the moments that I was discouraged, I really tried to look for people who I could talk to say, this and this happened. What do you think? how should I approach it? And sometimes it really is just pulling back and hitting pause or hitting delete and regrouping yourself. You can give and give and give, but at some point in time, you've got to have somebody come around and pour back in you. Otherwise, you're exhausted. And so I think that's a learning that I've really tried to take in mind. You can push, but a lot of times in your pushing, you have to be able to hold someone's hand as you try to bring them along. And so I think I've learned that in the midst of productive struggle. And if I've never had productive struggle in the process, I don't think I'd be where I am today in terms of recognizing, discerning where my gifts are. And so figuring out how to use those for the greater good. And sometimes, again, you know, that discernment reveals things to you that maybe you're uncomfortable with, but you have to deal with them in order to get better. And one of the things that a little saying that I've really been trying to think about is, you know, we're all a works in progress. If we don't see ourselves as a work in progress, then we have a problem. But I think one of the beauties that it is that you, in that mindset of work, being a work in progress, why would a person settle for their best when better is right around the corner? So that gives you that drive to just keep chucking it out.
Uh, Conversely, what would you consider your largest accomplishment as a leader? You know, you mentioned LPS and here at Doane. Is there a moment that stands out to you?
You know, I think one of my biggest accomplishments is some of the young Black women who have sat at my feet, who have really moved up in their own career pathways. And they've moved in a way that's been so graceful, so embracing of others. And so I think that has been one of my joys. I think another one of my joys too is as I look at our College of Ed and our work in the area of looking at this thing we call diversity. I think I've had some influence because I've been at the table. Is it as systemic as I want it? Not at all. But through this training that we've been doing as of late, I see more people grasping on to it. And I think that that is encouraging. Systemically at Doane on the upper level, I chaired the diversity task force at Doane. And one of my goals was to have a chief diversity officer. And because of things that happened, um, we have a person in that position. The position is there, but that was my baby. And I was denied the opportunity to even serve on the committee because I had spoken truth to power to the person above. And so recovering from that has taken a long time, but I believe that that's a example of my ongoing goal of creating systemic change. And so that position being in place, although not what I had initially desired, at least there were some stakeholders that made it happen. My ultimate desire is, under the new president that we'll get in June, it is my hope, A, that it is a woman, And B, a bonus would be if it would be a woman of color. That would just be the icing on the cake.
Absolutely.
But you got to change minds and hearts.
I think that's going to be the biggest journey, and I think that's been the biggest journey.
Exactly.
I have a couple more questions for you, and
Okay.
I'll let you get on with your busy evening. I know you talked about just furthering equality here on campus as one of your larger goals. Do you have a current leadership goal that you're working towards right now that you want the people to know about that might be able to help you out in anything?
I just think we have to really create more opportunities to collectively talk about what we want to see in leadership. And when we sit down at the table and we don't see people of the darker hues, we need to start asking the question. And it has to be student generated, you know.
Absolutely.
The adults can ask it, but it doesn't have impact because you all are the customers.
Mm-hmm.
And so to begin to ask those questions, why is it as I look at the social science area, why are the faces all white? Where are we looking? What can I do to influence that? So that's one area that I think we really need to try to get more stakeholders involved in, and not to take it lightly.
Absolutely. Hopefully it's a journey that we can see come to not end, but growing the next couple of months, as you stated. The last thing I have for you is that I know a lot of people live by mantras and personal mottos. Do you have a personal motto that you hold near and dear?
I love the one by Frederick Douglass, without a struggle, there is no progress. And I think that's been my lived experience at Doane, being in the struggle, but seeing progress, having worked under former President Fred Brown, who was open to things, who I could call on my way into campus and say, got an idea. He actually would answer the phone in his office and he would say, what's the rest of your day look like? Come in and let's talk. I mean, I think that in and of itself was one of the most, what do I want to say? One of the most reassuring things about change that, you know, I saw on the campus, that he was open, that he was an advocate for students of color. I mean, the police were giving the Black students the blues, and he called down and he pretty much lit the police department up. So I've seen some movement. We just need to get more movement.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for chatting with me. I'm going to end the recording real quick.
Okay.
I'm Riley, and this has been On the Way Up with Marilyn JohnsonFarr.